Thanks very much, Nicolina. Now, I mentioned at the top this story of the blackouts, more blackouts because of lack of energy supply in South Australia. If you're in South Australia now, I hope you can watch us. I hope you've got some power. If you're not in South Australia, this story has major federal implications, which is why just a moment ago I caught up with the Energy and Environment Minister, Josh Frydenberg. Thanks for joining us this evening. Can you tell us what's unfolded in South Australia with 40,000 or more households denied electricity supply tonight?
Well, there's been another outage in South Australia, and this just highlights the serious and the urgent challenges facing the South Australian electricity system. You're right, this evening about 40,000 households and customers and businesses lost their power for around 27 minutes. This was a result of a number of factors. Firstly, there was very high demand due to the high temperatures in South Australia, around 42 degrees today in Adelaide. Second, there was much less supply from wind generation than what is normally the case. In fact, at this point, wind power was providing only 2.5% of South Australia's energy needs. It could provide, at this point, more than 50% if it was operating at full capacity. So to go down to just 2.5% means that there was a lot of a lack of supply that was needed. And then thirdly, there were some problems with some generators, 3 generators in particular, which created a lack of power throughout the system. And the combination of this meant that the Australian Energy Market Operator asked Electranet, who was the transmission provider, to start shedding power, and that took place across the system, hence 40,000 customers lost power.
This is absolutely not good enough, and this is absolutely predictable. You talk about these things. As Energy Minister, you know that in South Australia and Victoria, in that sort of climate, you always get peak usage during the summer months on a hot day. So that's what the system's got to be built for, that peak usage. And you know that wind is intermittent, that there'll be times when there's not enough wind energy. So effectively, South Australia has just been caught out here because the wind wasn't blowing, there was not enough power.
Well, absolutely right. South Australia has been a basket case when it comes to energy policy, and we've made the point that Jay Weatherill's big experiment has failed. South Australia has gone ahead of the rest of the world, let alone other states, in pursuing these 50% renewable energy targets and making it a reality. As a result, South Australia relies on intermittent sources of power, particularly wind, but also solar. And you saw the closure of your last coal-fired power station, Northern, in May last year, which was a brown coal-fired power station.
But this is not how a first world country should operate. A first world country should not run out of electricity. I'm told that during this blackout period, during this period of poor supply at the moment with low wind inputs, the price of electricity per megawatt hour has gone from an expected $200 or so a megawatt hour up to nearly $14,000 a megawatt hour. Presumably that cost eventually is passed on to consumers.
You're right, the spot price did reach the cap of $14,000, and that's a big, big problem. And it's not the first time. You see, we've had outages in South Australia. Obviously, the whole state lost power, the first time that's ever happened to a state in Australia. Last September, 1.7 million households lost power. Then you had another outage in December, you've had another one in January and another in February, and it's just not good enough. Obviously, we feel deeply for those households and businesses that lost power. We know this really hurts. I mean, if you are an elderly person or a young family in these high temperatures and you don't have access to an air conditioner, this can be very distressing. And obviously businesses rely on power to operate, to employ people, to earn export dollars. And so this is going to the heart of the sustainability of the economy of South Australia. So we say to the South Australian government, we stand ready to work with you. Obviously we're going to put the public first, but these ideological targets have failed. And we say to Bill Shorten, drop your 50% renewable energy target because you just want to see the experience in South Australia writ large across the country, and it's just not good enough.
Well, the Premier of South Australia, Jay Weatherill, the one who runs the Labor state, the one that Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull referred to yesterday as the socialist paradise when he was mocking the power situation, Jay Weatherill says this is the national market failing him. He's saying it's not his fault for having almost 50% renewable energy. He's blaming the national market. Any truth in his defence?
Well, the reality is if you had more supply in South Australia, if you had more thermal generators, if you had the coal-fired power stations, you wouldn't run into the problem that you do with having so much wind, namely when the wind's not blowing, or if it's solar power and the sun's not shining, power is not being generated. This is not the first time this has happened. In fact, in June, July last year, on one day, there was the wind and the solar power was providing 80% of South Australia's needs, but on another day it was providing just 1%. And that level of intermittency is a real problem for the sustainability of the system, let alone for affordability of electricity. Sure, storage will improve over time and we'll have batteries that are on grid scale and commercial scale, but we're not there yet. And until that time happens, state governments, Labor state governments, like the Queensland one with its 50% target and the Victorian government with its 40% target, and of course Jay Weatherill with his 50% target.
Well, and breaking news tonight, this might be news to you, but I believe the Labor Party in Western Australia in the lead up to their current state election campaign are going to announce a 50% target there as well.
Well, if that is the case, that's another example of madness. Because these states can't cope with these high renewable energy targets, which is leading to more renewables into the system when the system doesn't have the proper practices and processes in place to integrate that form of intermittent power. That's why Malcolm Turnbull has said our first priority is energy security and energy affordability, and we are investigating what options there are to put in place these new ultra supercritical coal-fired power stations and to ensure that we don't see more coal-fired power stations close like what we saw recently with Hazelwood.
Well, how about
we understand
Energy Minister,
the system needs to be stabilised.
Sorry to interrupt, Josh Frydenberg, but what about that renewable energy target? You're still putting more and more renewables into the system around the country. Why not cap that now? If you cap that now, it would reduce the amount of renewable energy going into the system and stop this madness, as you call it, going any further.
Well, the problem, as I've said publicly before, with this renewable energy target, which is legislated, and therefore people like Nick Xenophon, who support a 50% renewable energy target, Chris, aren't about to vote to scrap it, would mean there would be greater uncertainty with the system, which would mean the renewable energy certificates would increase in price, which would therefore lead companies to pay the penalty rather than buying the certificates, and then you get the worst of both worlds. You get a penalty on business, which effectively becomes a carbon tax, if you like, and secondly, you don't get the new generation of power that goes into the system, which obviously we want more generation into the system. So you do get the worst of both worlds if you were to go down that path. That being said, we're not talking about increasing the renewable energy target like the Labor Party, who have a 50% renewable energy target, which the Bloomberg Energy Finance Corporation has said will require $48 billion of investment, which will inevitably be passed on to consumers in the form of high prices.
What a mess. Thanks for shedding some light on it for us tonight, Josh Frydenberg.
Thanks, Chris, and our feelings go out to those people in South Australia tonight.
Those